Book review: James, a novel by Percival Everett in James. A novel. Acclaimed author Percival Everett boldly reimagines Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn from the perspective of Jim, the enslaved man who has long stood in the margins of American literature. With intellectual precision, satirical sharpness, and profound empathy, Everett gives voice to character who, for generations, was silenced or simplified. The result is not merely radical intervention, an act of literary justice that both honors and interrogates its source material while offering deeply original vision of Black resistance, identity, and survival. Plot summary: James, a novel, is Percival Everett's searing, imaginative reworking of Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, told from the perspective of the enslaved man known in Twain's book as Jim. In Everett's hands, this character becomes James, fully realized, introspective, and intelligent man whose story has long been silenced. By shifting the lens, Everett both critiques the original text and crafts bold narrative of liberation, performance, survival. The novel begins in antebellum Missouri, where James is enslaved on the Phelps plantation. Though he outwardly performs the role of the docile and uneducated Jim, readers are immediately granted access to his inner voice. Richly articulate, ironic, and self-aware narrator who understands the danger of revealing his intelligence to the white world around him. James has taught himself to read and write. Secret he guards closely. The catalyst for the story is the threat of James being sold and separated from his wife and young daughter. When he learns of the plan, James escapes into the night seeking freedom and way to reunite his family. Along the way, he encounters Huckleberry Finn, white boy fleeing his abusive father. The two form traveling partnership down the Mississippi River, echoing Twain's original plot. But in Everett's retelling, the power dynamics are exposed and questioned. James quickly realizes that Huck, though sympathetic and friendly, is still shaped by his environment and unaware of the deeper implications of slavery. While Huck believes himself to be James's friend, James recognizes that trust is luxury he cannot afford. He plays along with Huck's illusions, manipulating situations through his wit and insight while maintaining the mask of ignorance necessary to survive. As they journey southward on raft, they encounter cast familiar and reimagined characters, con men like the Duke and the Dauphin, slave catchers and townspeople steeped in the casual cruelty of slavery. In each encounter, James navigates not only physical danger, but the constant threat of being exposed as literate and autonomous. The duplicity required of him, acting the fool while thinking like scholar, becomes central theme of the novel. Rather than heading north to freedom, James turns back south to find and free his wife and daughter. The decision underscores Everett's refusal to offer conventional escape narrative. Freedom in James is not just about reaching location, it's about reclaiming selfhood, family, and narrative control. The novel ends on a note that is at once triumphant and uncertain. James has reclaimed his story, but the world remains perilous. Everett avoids sentimentality, instead offering complex, honest portrait of one man's fight to live, love, and speak in society built on silencing him. Narrative, voice, and point of view. One of the most striking achievements of James is its narrative voice, told from the first-person perspective of Jim. Now, James Everett completely transforms the reading experience from Twain's version, where Twain limited Jim's speech to dialect meant to signal ignorance or comic relief. Everett gives James full interior life. He is intelligent, literate, reflective, and, crucially, strategic. James presents identity. Outwardly, he performs the role expected of him by white society, deferential, uneducated, and compliant. Inwardly, he is deeply articulate, aware of the power dynamics around him, and able to manipulate them with calculated precision. This narrative device is central to Everett's project. He doesn't merely correct stereotype, he exposes the psychological toll and cunning resistance demanded of enslaved people just to survive. His dual consciousness. James's inner monologue versus his external persona mirrors the real historical condition of enslaved individuals, evoking W.E.B. Du Bois's concept of double consciousness. Everett uses this schism to both tragic and comic effect, highlighting the absurdity of racism and the painful acrobatics required of the oppressed. Character development. James and Huck Everett's reimagining of Jim as James is both reclamation and redefinition. James is not psychic, not symbol, and not plot device. He is a father, a philosopher, a trickster, and above all, a man burdened with the impossible task of appearing docile while dreaming of freedom. The relationship between James and Huck Finn is layered and complex. Huck, in Twain's version, is often celebrated for his moral development, especially his decision to help Jim escape slavery, even if it means going to hell. Everett challenges this dynamic. In James, Huck remains child of his time, impressionable, sympathetic at moments, but still steeped in the unconscious racism of his upbringing. James sees Huck's kindness, but he also sees its limits. He cannot fully trust Huck, nor can he afford to, and the novel doesn't let the reader rest easy in any simplistic morality. This is not sentimentalized friendship, rather it is a fraught asymmetrical bond shaped by necessity and unequal power. Huck is not vilified, but he is no hero either. In Everett's hands, the moral high ground is not granted cheaply. Themes of freedom, language, and then performance at its core. James's meditation on freedom, not just the legal status of being free, but the psychological, emotional, and linguistic dimensions of what it means to be one's person. James's use of language is central to this exploration. He speaks fluently and beautifully in his inner thoughts, but he must suppress his intelligence in public. This comes a metaphor for all the ways Black Americans have had to code switch and perform for survival in white-dominated spaces. His verbal dexterity is an act of rebellion. Every time he plays dumb to manipulate or evade danger, he asserts kind of hidden autonomy. Everett explores the theme of performance through this linguistic mask. The entire novel is performance within performance. James must act the fool to live, just as Everett uses the novel to act out the assumptions embedded in Twain's original. Satire, parody, and irony abound. But they are never flippant. Instead, they serve to critique the structures of race, power, and myth that underpin American identity. Historical revision and intertextuality. James is not just a response to Twain. It is conversation with American literature and history. Everett doesn't shy away from the brutality of slavery. It depicts beatings, humiliation, and the constant fear of separation or death with unflinching clarity. These scenes are visceral, but never gratuitous. They insist on the reader's confrontation with the true horror of the period. What distinguishes Everett's historical critique is its intertextuality. He references Twain, but also invokes other writers and thinkers. Douglas Dubois Baldwin, who grappled with the legacy of slavery and the burden of representation. The novel functions as kind of palimpsest. Beneath the story of James, Huck lies the ghost of the American literary canon, rewritten and contested. This intertextuality deepens the novel's power. James is not just telling a different story, it is writing the very foundations of American storytelling. Everett uses Twain's framework to critique the comfortable myths white America has long told itself, about race, innocence, and the good of white people. Satire and humour as resistance. Though James deals with heavy themes, it is also frequently and brilliantly funny. Everett is master satirist, and his humour here is razor sharp. Much of the novel's comedy emerges from James's internal commentary as he navigates the absurdities of white behaviour. His wry observations, biting wit, and deadpan delivery echo Everett's broader satirical project. For example, there are moments when James silently mocks the logic of slavery or notes the ridiculousness of the white men who presume to control him. These moments are laugh-out-loud funny, but they also serve a deeper function. Laughter in James becomes a form of resistance, a way to maintain dignity in the face of dehumanization. The use of satire also extends to literary forms. Everett mimics and mocks the conventions of 19th-century adventure novels, including overly earnest moralizing, florid prose, and melodramatic plot twists. But he does so to expose how those very conventions have historically erased or distorted Black experience. Structure and pacing. Everett's novel roughly follows the same plot trajectory as Twain's, but it expands and deepens scenes, offering new perspectives and alternate interpretations. The pace is brisk, but not rushed, and the narrative never loses its emotional center. The structure reflects James's psychological journey. As he moves down the Mississippi, he moves deeper into himself, into memory, fear, longing, and determination. The episodic nature of the river journey provides framework for encounters that challenge and shape James's worldview, while also critiquing the hypocrisy of antebellum society. Notably, Everett does not conclude the story with easy resolution. The novel ends in ambiguity, reminding us that freedom is not a destination, but an ongoing struggle. Stylistic mastery. Everett's prose is elegant, efficient, and then evocative. He writes with clarity that belies the novel's complexity. The narrative voice is consistent and compelling, with James emerging as one of Everett's most fully realized characters. The language oscillates between lyricism and earthy realism. At times, James reflects on language itself, meditating on the limits of words to capture experience. These philosophical digressions enrich the novel without disrupting its flow. Everett also experiments subtly with form. There are moments of metafictional self-awareness. James occasionally alludes to the fact that he is telling story choosing what to reveal or omit. This reflexivity invites the reader to question not only the story being told, but the way stories about race, power, and nationhood have been constructed throughout history. Conclusion: radical reimagining James's triumph of literary reclamation. It reclaims narrative and reclaims history itself. Everett has not only written an important novel, he has written a necessary one. In doing so, he forces readers to reckon with the ways in which even beloved classics can perpetuate harmful erasures. This novel will challenge readers, especially those who hold Huckleberry Finn dear, not to abandon Twain, but to revisit him through new and more critical lens. It also reaffirms Everett's place as one of the most intellectually daring and morally engaged writers of our time. In James, Everett doesn't just fill in the silences of American literature, he exploits them, leaving behind deeper, truer, and more humane narrative in their place.